The stage glowed under blinding lights, and a sea of cameras blinked red. Broadcasting the summit lived to millions. Behind the podium, a sleek LED screen shimmered with the words, West African Unity, a new dawn. It was supposed to be another diplomatic event filled with polished speeches and rehearsed smiles. But this was not going to be one of those days. Captain Ibrahim Traore, the young and resolute leader of Burkina Faso, stood still, calm in posture, but with something stormy flickering in his eyes. His presence was steady, yet every breath he took hinted that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Across the hall sat President Bola Tinubu, surrounded by ministers and dignitaries. His face was blank, unreadable, carved in stone. The moderator's voice sliced through the silence, polite and practiced. Captain Traore, you have the floor. Traore stepped forward, each stride deliberate, each movement weighted with the pain of 1,000 unheard voices. The atmosphere thickened in living rooms, cafes, crowded markets, and even border patrol huts. People leaned forward. In hospitals, televisions were turned up. Soldiers on night duty paused to listen. The entire region braced for what would follow. But Traore did not begin with diplomatic pleasantries. No thanks, no greetings. He simply looked up, locked eyes with Tinubu, and said in a voice that trembled with grief, I speak today not as a leader, not as a soldier, but as a brother who could not sleep last night after what I saw. Gasps echoed across the room. Confusion spread like smoke. Then, without warning, the screen behind him flickered and a video began to play. A grainy clip. A little girl no more than 7 crying beside her mother's motionless body, blood staining the sheets. Her small hand tugged helplessly at her mother's arm. The caption read, Zamfara, Nigeria. A sharp intake of breath echoed across the auditorium. She was only 7, Traore said, voice cracking, eyes shimmering. Her name was Fatima. She died in her sleep, shot during a night raid that no one will take responsibility for. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, tenderly, as though it might crumble in his hands. I carry her image with me, he said, unfolding the photograph, not to blame, not to shame, but to remind us of what we've become too numb to feel. The video continued. Black and white footage of scorched homes, shattered dolls, and bare feet sprinting over broken glass. A child's scream echoed faintly through the speakers. It was raw, unapproved, and unrehearsed. Even the moderator looked stunned. Traore or EAQ didn't flinch. She begged a soldier to help her mother, he said, his voice trembling, and he told her to run. He paused. She never came back. The weight of that silence pressed on everyone like gravity. One journalist buried her face in her hands. A man in the second row choked back tears. President Tinubu shifted slightly in his seat, his expression still unreadable, but his jaw clenched. I am not here to argue, Mr. President, Traore said, looking directly at him. I am here to beg you not as a rival, but as a father, as an African, as a human being. This cannot go on. Then came the question that would ripple across headlines for weeks. Tell me, Bola, do you sleep at night? Gasps. Someone in the back stood up involuntarily. When reports say 89 villagers were killed in Sokoto last week, when drones light up the skies and children mistake them for stars, when mothers bury children without names, do you sleep? Tinubu tried to speak, but Traore raised a hand. This is not politics, he said quietly. This is a funeral. The screen changed again. Charred school books, a baby bottle blackened by fire, the scorched shell of a once bustling market. They are not numbers, he continued. They are our people, farmers, daughters, school children. They are Africa's heartbeat, and we are letting it flatline. No applause, no movement, just grief. I do not need intelligence briefings, Traore said. I have seen the videos you want to forget. I have heard the screams that were never recorded. I have looked into the eyes of widows who no longer cry because there are no tears left. Then, softly, Fatima had no shoes. She ran barefoot through rocks, through glass, through blood. The moderator dared not interrupt. The air was too heavy, too sacred. Traore's tone shifted stern, but pleading. Mr. President, I'm not asking for a soundbite. I'm asking for a soul. I am asking for the part of you that remembers what it is to cradle a sleeping child and fear for their future. Sniffles, sobs, all across West Africa. People wept. Traore closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them with a steady, fiery calm. I know war, he said. I have buried soldiers. I have kissed blood-stained flags and written letters to mothers. But this what is happening now in Nigeria is not war. He looked back at Tinubu. But after now, when you carry the name of a nation, It is not your spine that breaks first. It is your heart, and when that breaks your people fall. The screen went dark, silence returned. But this was no longer a political summit. This was a reckoning broadcast live to every corner of Africa. And Traore, he wasn't done yet. The studio was frozen in time. Not a single journalist typed, not a single camera operator moved. They just watched, transfixed. It wasn't a press conference anymore, it was a reckoning. I did not come here to shame you, Captain Traore said, his voice low but unwavering. I came because silence is a slow, choking death, and Africa is suffocating in it. He looked down at his hands for a long moment. They trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of generations. Then he looked up, locking eyes with President Tinubu across the stage. A leader's chest, he said, must beat loudest during war. It must hold the fear of children, the screams of widows, the prayers whispered by grandmothers who no longer have the strength to hope. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage. Mr. President, he said, softly, now, if your heart still beats for your people, let the world hear it. Tinubu's lips parted, but no words came. Not a single syllable, just a long, ragged breath, and then a tear. A single tear rolled down his cheek, tracing the lines of age and fatigue. The summit was only halfway through, yet everyone in that room knew the moment had already escaped its bounds. It was now history. Clips of Traore's speech exploded across social media, Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp, and countless African news networks. Comments flooded in from Lagos to Bamako. He speaks for all of us. A Burkinabe leader has more heart than our own. Nigeria is crying, and Captain Traore is the only one listening. Across Nigeria, young people huddled in cafes, community halls, under market tents watching grainy replays and cracked television sets, on smartphones balanced on bricks, on power banks in darkness. In the city of Lagos, a mother sobbed as she watched from her one-room apartment, her hand pressed against the screen. In Kaduna, a group of orphan teenagers watched silently, their faces lit by a dusty projector. And in Yola, a journalist named Lara, who had lost her nephew in a recent bombing, posted on X, Captain Traore just said everything we've been too broken to say. Thank you. Meanwhile, back on stage, Traore returned to the microphone. The air around him felt holy. The weight of every continent's injustice hung there. This is not about Burkina Faso, he said, his voice more resolute than ever. This is about all of us as Africans, as neighbors, as brothers. He raised his hand and pointed directly at the main camera, speaking not to the room, but to the millions watching. To the children out there watching this, I see you. You deserve peace. To the fathers carrying guilt, you are not alone. And to the leaders hiding behind silence, your people are dying louder than your words. A stunned cameraman forgot to cut to commercial. Another one dropped his headset. The moderator had stopped taking notes. And yet, this was only the beginning. Traore reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn, creased envelope. He held it like something sacred. This was sent to me 3 days ago, he said quietly, by a mother from Yobe State. He carefully unfolded the letter, smoothing out its edges with reverence. Her name is Miriam. Her son's name was Azim. He was 14. He loved football. He wanted to become a doctor. Traore's jaw tightened. Last week, Azim was shot on his way back from Quranic school, caught in crossfire between gangs and government forces. This, he raised the letter, is her voice, and then he read it. Captain Traore, I write to you because I know you will listen. I do not want revenge. I just want someone to care. Azim's blood is still on my doorstep. I wash it every morning, but it returns with the rain. A gasp rippled through the studio. Traore looked back up, voice shaking. That rain, it's not from the sky. It is from all the tears Nigeria has cried, and still no one listens. The camera panned across faces stiff with emotion. One diplomat covered his eyes. Another clutched his heart. We cannot lead if we do not first kneel before the people we've failed, he said. Leadership without empathy is tyranny. Power without love is hollow. Tinubu looked up. For the first time, real shame flickered in his eyes. Traore saw it, but he didn't weaponize it. He stepped closer instead. Mr. President, he said, gently, I know the weight of power. I carry it too. But when leaders look away, people vanish. He paused. The room leaned into the silence, and Nigeria is disappearing. Gasps, audible, sharp, uncontainable. No African leader had ever spoken these words on live television, in front of the world, every week. I hear of kidnappings in Kaduna, orphans in Katsina, explosions in Borno, but the world just scrolls past. Your government releases statements when It should be saving lives, Tinubu tried to reply. But nothing came. His lips moved, and nothing followed. I do not say this to humiliate you, Traore added, his voice tender. I say this because I still believe you can turn back. Behind him, the LED screen flickered again. This time, it showed a grainy image of Nigerian children sleeping on torn mats in a crowded IDP camp. Some clung to each other, others stared blankly at the ceiling. Just look at them, he whispered. This is not fake news. This is not propaganda. This is real. A tear slid down Tinubu's cheek. What legacy do we leave? Traore asked. If children must learn the national anthem under gunfire. The silence in the studio was absolute. Traore stepped back, his next words slow and steady. 2 nights ago, I saw a video. My phone lit up with a boy playing a broken plastic drum. The screen behind him changed. The image of a barefoot child tapping on a cracked drum appeared. Behind him, the ruins of a blast. His eyes bright with innocence, untouched by the fire. Behind him, his name is Ibrahim, Traore said. Same as mine. But he was not playing for fun. He was trying to calm the younger children hiding in the rubble. The audience stirred. That broken drum, he said, made more peace than our governments have in years. Tinubu looked like he had stopped breathing. That boy with nothing gave comfort. So I ask again, what are we doing with all this power, this status, this responsibility? He turned directly to the camera, his eyes ablaze. If we cannot protect children like Ibrahim, we do not deserve the titles we wear. Then, with profound humility, he added, and I include myself, the room cracked open. The wall between power and people fell. The wall between governments and grief shattered. Traore's final words rang out like thunder. It is time for action, not slogans, not speeches. Action, one clap, then another, and then, like a flood, the entire studio stood, roaring with applause. Some in tears, others holding each other. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like politics. It felt like truth. But just as the applause began to swell, the screen cut to black. Across Africa, millions of televisions, phones, and live streams went dark. People gasped, mothers panicked, children screamed. For a moment, it seemed the broadcast had been sabotaged. But the message had already reached where it mattered most, the hearts of a continent. The screen went black not because of a technical glitch, but because someone in the control room had panicked. The speech was too raw, too emotional, too real. It pierced too deep, and somewhere high above, the order came down, cut the feed. But truth, once spoken, cannot be silenced. Social media exploded within seconds. Why did they cut it? Who is afraid of the truth? Let him finish. Africa needs to hear this. Back in the studio, Captain Ibrahim Traore stood quietly amid the chaos, his calm presence unmoved while technicians scrambled and producers argued in hushed, frantic voices. One of them leaned in and whispered urgently in his ear, "We've been ordered to end the stream." Too emotional, too political. Traore didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he walked calmly off the stage, directly toward a cameraman who had continued filming for the studio's internal archive. "If the world cannot hear me live," Traore said with quiet steel in his voice, "then they will hear me offline." The cameraman nodded without a word and kept the camera rolling. Then Traore did something no one expected. He stepped down from the platform and walked directly toward President Bola Tinubu's seat. Every eye in the studio followed him. Every breath was held. "Mr. President," Traore said, his tone measured and sincere, "may I speak to you leader to leader?" Tinubu looked up slowly. For the first time all evening, he responded, I am listening." No microphone, no podium, no fanfare. Just 2 African leaders standing eye to eye, surrounded by silence that felt sacred. Traore or EAQ did not accuse, he did not attack. He placed a hand gently on Tinubu's shoulder and spoke softly. "I know you carry pain," he said. "I saw it in your eyes tonight." Tinubu blinked. Something flickered in him. Vulnerability, perhaps. "But our people," Traore continued, "do not need leaders who only carry pain. They need leaders who act through it." The room stayed still. Even the air felt charged. Not a single phone rang. Not a single journalist typed. Time had folded in on itself. Tinubu's voice came next, dry, heavy, and slow. "You do not understand how hard it is." Traore nodded. "You're right. I do not understand your pain." He turned toward the giant screen behind them. It now displayed a map of Nigeria, studded with red dots. Each dot marked a mass killing. In the last 3 months, there were too many to count. "But I do understand their pain," Traore said. "And that is who I speak for." Tinubu's hand trembled. The weight was visible now. Years of decisions, denials, buried truths, it was all unraveling in real time. Do you truly believe it's not too late? Tinubu asked, barely above a whisper. Traore's response was immediate, his words cutting through the air with the finality of a bell. It is only too late, when we choose comfort over courage. The cameraman zoomed in. Tinubu's face shifted, and then, the moment everyone would remember forever, a tear broke free, and behind them, like a tidal wave held back too long, applause erupted. It started slowly, uncertainly, but it grew louder, stronger. This wasn't political, it was personal, it was human. Traore returned to his seat without fanfare. He had said what needed to be said. Tinubu, however, remained standing. He looked out across the room crowded with diplomats, journalists, and survivors of silence. His lips moved, stopped, moved again. Then finally, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a black pen and a folded piece of paper. "If I may," he said, his voice trembling, "I would like to write something." The moderators exchanged confused glances but said nothing. Tinubu scribbled quickly, then carried the note to the very podium where Traore had shaken the world. "This is not a speech," he said. He unfolded the paper. "This is a promise," and then he read it aloud. "Tonight, I will travel to Kaduna. I will meet the mothers. I will walk through the camps. I will not speak as a president. I will listen as a father. And I will not return to Aso Rock until I have answers, real ones." He looked at Traore and nodded, emotion thick in his throat. "Thank you for breaking me open." The room exploded. A standing ovation shook the walls. People cried openly, and online, a single phrase began to trend across Nigeria and Burkina Faso: "Africa is healing." Later that night, a grainy, low-resolution video shot on an old Android phone began circulating online. It shook the continent harder than any official news clip. President Bola Tinubu had arrived quietly in Kaduna. No sirens, no convoy, just one black SUV, a single aide, and a notebook in his hand. He stepped out into the dust, alone, and walked into an internally displaced persons IDP camp. The camp's residents stared in disbelief. One boy, holding a plastic bottle shaped like a toy gun, whispered, "Is that really him?" Tinubu didn't speak. He sat on a wooden bench between tents patched with rice sacks and cardboard. The camp director handed him a list. "These are the names of those killed last month," she said. 47. "We haven't buried them." All he read, every name. Then he looked up. "May I meet their mothers?" Word spread like fire. 20 minutes later, 6 grieving mothers stood before him. One held her daughter's only school photograph. Another clutched a blood-stained shirt. They did not yell. They did not protest. They simply wept. And the president, once Nigeria's most powerful man, wept with them. That night, he didn't return to his presidential suite. He laid on a thin mat beneath a rusted tent pole and scribbled a single sentence into his journal. "Captain Traore did not embarrass me. He reminded me that I still have a soul." Back in Burkina Faso, President Traore sat in his quiet office, watching the footage. His advisors hovered, unsure what to say. Traore stared at the screen, unmoving, and then, with a whisper, he said, "He went." His advisor nodded. "Yes, sir," and he listened. But something even more extraordinary was beginning across the continent. Children, yes, children began sending video messages to their presidents. Inspired by Traore's words, they spoke from their hearts. The most viral came from a 9-year-old girl in Kano named Sarda, barefoot, standing on cracked concrete outside her school. She held a sign written in charcoal: "Stop the killing, let us learn." Her voice was small, but clear. "If you see us dying and you stay quiet, maybe you do not love us." She didn't scream, she didn't cry, but her innocence sliced deeper than any politician's speech ever could. By nightfall, her video had over 9 million views. Traore reposted it with a simple caption: "You are the voice of a new Africa, and I hear you." That night, following Captain Ibrahim Traore's soul-shaking address, a wave swept across the African continent. Not a wave of panic or fear, but one of awakening. Several African presidents, some with trembling hands, released joint statements, promising to do more. The hashtags trended. The world was watching. But Traore didn't celebrate. He turned to his advisors quietly and said only this: "Words are good, but I'm preparing to return to Nigeria myself." The room fell into a stunned silence. No cameras, no ceremony. He wasn't going back for applause. He was going to stand where a little girl had fallen, where a child named Fatima had died. At dawn, Traore arrived in Zamfara. There was no motorcade, no press corps waiting, just the early sun. golden and sorrowful, and a lone local guide who led him to a small patch of dry land beside the ruins of a collapsed hut. This, the guide said in a choked whisper, is where she fell. Fatima. Traore stood still. He did not speak for 5 full minutes. A bird chirped in the distance. A stray goat wandered past. The air was heavy with memory. And then without fanfare, without words, he knelt. Fatima, he whispered, his voice barely audible, trembling, like dry leaves in the wind. The world did not know you, but I will not let you be forgotten. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn item, a single white bead from his late mother's necklace, a necklace she had given him the day he became a soldier. He pressed the bead gently into the dirt. This is for you, he said, voice cracking, so that every time someone forgets your name, God will remember your face. The guide began to cry, and then, as if called by some unseen spirit, villagers began to gather. One by one, they emerged from their homes, mothers with infants on their backs, barefoot children, weary farmers. They did not cheer, they did not speak, they simply stood in reverent silence. One woman placed her baby on the ground and whispered, "You are the only one who came." A wind picked up, rustling the ashes of yesterday's sorrow, and in that fragile, sacred moment, hope returned to Zamfara. As Captain Traore turned to leave the field, a little girl no older than 6 stepped out from the crowd. She held a broken pencil in her tiny hand and looked up with wide, serious eyes. "Sir," she asked, "can I still go to school?" Traore knelt again. He looked her in the eye. "Yes," he said gently, "you can, and you must." The girl nodded, and then softly, without warning, she began to sing an old house lullaby. Her mother had sung it to her before the gunfire, before the loss, before fear replaced laughter. One voice became 2, 2 became 20. Soon, the entire village was singing. Their voices rose not in protest, not in performance, but in grief reborn as healing. And in the middle of it all stood Traore, no longer a president, no longer a soldier, but a father who had found his lost daughter in the eyes of every child around him. A drone, flying low for mapping purposes, accidentally captured the scene. The footage went viral within hours. "This is the Africa we fight for," one comment read. "This is the Africa we must never lose again." 2 weeks later, in the very studio where it had all begun, President Bola Tinubu returned not as the defiant statesman he had once been, but as a man transformed. He carried with him a simple wooden box, handcrafted by displaced artisans from Borno. The room stood as he entered. Across from him, Captain Traore waited. When they met, no speeches, no pomp, they embraced silently. No words were exchanged, none were needed. Then Tinubu opened the box. Inside lay a folded Nigerian flag. Stitched along its golden hem was a single name, Fatima. "She did not die in vain," Tinubu said, voice hushed. "Her name will now fly with our nation's flag in every IDP camp across Nigeria." Traore's eyes filled with tears. Then, together, the 2 leaders stepped forward and made a joint declaration. $100 million in emergency relief for victims of regional violence, the African Child Safety Pact, signed by 14 nations, and a new education fund named after Fatima. From Nigeria to Burkina Faso, from Ghana to the diaspora, joy erupted in marketplaces, mosques, churches, and classrooms. The people didn't just cheer, they wept. For the first time in years, they believed. Leadership no longer felt like a burden. It felt like love. Weeks later, in a grand hall in Abuja, Captain Ibrahim Traore once again stood at the microphone. But this time, he was not there to plead. He was there to proclaim. The audience was filled with mothers, orphans, students, farmers, and soldiers, the soul of Africa. He paused. Then he looked not at the crowd but directly into the camera, directly into the heart of Africa. "The world watched us bleed," he said slowly, powerfully. "But now, let the world watch us rise." Behind him, a giant screen came to life. It showed Fatima's smile, Sarda's video, Tinubu in Kaduna, the girls singing in Zamfara. The audience stood. They held hands. People wept in living rooms, in refugee camps, in border towns. "We are not powerless," Traore declared. "We are not voiceless. We are the storm that will protect every child, with our peace, not our weapons." He raised his hand high. And for the first time in modern African memory, leaders were not seen as kings. They were seen as servants of the people. The broadcast ended, but the movement had only just begun. If you felt this in your soul, don't scroll. Leave a comment for Fatima. Say her name. Tell the world what you wish every leader would hear. Like this video if you believe Africa deserves peace. Subscribe if you believe in leaders like Captain Ibrahim Traore, and share this with someone who still believes in humanity, because this is not just a story. This is a cry, a call, a promise,